That's a weird name, but yeah, could you do that?
I'm Jeff Kruchkow, and this is title undecided because I can't think of anything good. It used to be Scum or Not, but that's not great. We're going to look at a bunch of scenarios on the borderline so you can get some practice at calls that are much less automatic. It's not like you walk up like, yep, mark cards, get them. There's much more of the like, was this okay, was this not okay? And a big aspect of this is protecting a player's skill advantage. We don't want to let someone cheat or take advantage of someone else unfairly, but at the same time, more skilled players should have an advantage. That's the way Magic is. It's literally written in the rules. So, basic intro stuff. Arcades and Nicol Bolas will be our active player and non-active player. Written a comp royale, keep in mind it regular. If you have an app on your phone to look up the Magic Tournament rules, infraction procedure guideline, or comprehensive rules, that would be useful just so you can cite your answers. Untapped, tapped. It's your orientation. I didn't try and do any nonsense sideways battlefield stuff. Cards in hand or library are in a box. Otherwise, every card you see is on the battlefield. And they're controlled by the dragon whose side they're on. Middle of being the middle. So this is Arcades, this is Nicol Bolas. So, first scenario. Arcades casts the card Champion of Wits. Sure. Resolves. With the end of the battlefield and trigger on the stack, I'm going to kill it in Moment of Craving. Arcades asks, okay, I still draw 2 to discard 2, right? Actually, you're going to draw 0 and discard 2. It had no power when it died. This question, a lot of the other ones end in a judge call. That is the end of this question. Neither of these players are calling for a judge as of yet, because I want the context of, you're walking by the table, are we keeping walking, or are we going to stop and talk to the players? And then also think about, if either of them calls a judge, how are you handling it? So you can go into your small groups and add that. I'll give you a couple minutes to discuss that with everyone, and then we can ask questions of the players.
James. My middle name's James. You can say Nate.
On this one.
So what are your names?
Seems good.
Sherman. Okay.
So, yeah, definitely intriguing scenario.
Yeah, I think it's all set up. Oh, that's someone else's.
So like if your opponent like convinces you like let's say that you do draw some number of cards. Convinces you don't draw. What group of nature like you intervene? I could talk you out of something like kind of like
What they're saying is like they're leaving off the first sentence. What is if you look at this,
no, that's
so that like
if you choose so like
if I put on cards, it would really help.
That's what I'm doing right now. Okay, so that's
It gets -2/-2 until end of turn and gain 2 life. The champions on Wits is you draw cards with
you draw cards what is the trigger goes on the stack. What you're doing.
Yes, I would like to.
That would use its power
At which
to
point,
resolve.
when it goes to resolve, then you just say, I
I
want my 2 cards or yes, that is true. So he chooses to draw. It's almost like that's he can choose to not do anything. Yes, my ability triggered, I choose not to draw. So that is not totally
Because it doesn't, it's not.
Well, I mean, if you want to really want to play, instead of saying,
The opponent's not getting the option to tell me
this is
what actually happened.
instead of
And
saying
that's not true.
that
technically he's trying to
And then assuming he's saying, yes, I'm doing this thing. And he's just verifying, do my thing, draw. No, actually, if I was
It's like, and I guess there's powers over
because he's assuming that it doesn't stop. He's saying, yeah,
I think
if
player
the
didn't
player
go
didn't
away. Yeah, it's
Right,
I
I
disagree.
you're right.
Well, the way you worded it is leverage.
I think the real question is active player,
Okay, yeah.
definition of association.
Well, it hasn't gotten to that point. This is where we stop.
Let's prepare ourselves for what question
Nobody's
we want to add.
decided.
All right, judges. Let's bring it back in. So, first part. Is there any questions we want to ask of Arcades and Nicol Bolas?
Not right now.
No.
Not right now?
On the par.
Yeah, we're good. And everyone's sure we don't want to ask them anything?
What roll are we at?
We are at competitive to start, and we'll discuss, regular. Okay, so has there been any infraction and associated penalty? Is there a problem here? Did anybody do anything wrong?
Not yet.
If I'm strolling by as a judge, am I just going to keep strolling?
I would hover.
Okay, you can hover, but you're not going to interrupt.
Yeah, not gonna interrupt.
Cool, I agree. Now, let's take this one more step. Let's say that Nicol Bolas makes his assertion, not assertment. He says, actually, you draw 0 and discard 2. At which point, Arcades calls a judge. Arcades says, Sherwin, I thought I still drew 2 and discard 2, and he said my creature had 0 power and dies, so I draw 0 and discard 2. How do we respond to that?
That's true.
I would say there's some choices to be made here. Assuming you don't do anything to the moment of craving response.
Are we competitive or regular at this point?
Competitive. And we'll say the moment of craving has resolved. This card is in the
Could
graveyard.
you answer to the person, the Arcades player? Could you just say, well, what does your card do? And maybe this will let him see what his options are without you actually telling him what he can and can't do.
Do we want to help him see what his options are?
No.
So it just answer you got some choices to make.
Yeah. You have some choices to make.
And
Actually, I think saying you have some choices to make is actually too far.
okay.
Because you're implying that there's a choice, right?
Right. Fair.
Should you decide to draw cards?
So this is a real scenario I took at a Grand Prix.
Go.
And this is how it went. They called me over, said basically exactly this. He says, so I draw 0 and discard 2. And I said, you can do that. And a judge standing behind the other player, who's a new L2, says, well, yeah, but it's a May ability. This is the perfect example of the kind of thing where, like, Bolas's behavior looks a little sketchy, right? But everything they do is above board, and it's very important that when you answer the call, you don't help out Arcades. You do not give him the answer. So how you answer that question is very important in terms of how you word it to them. It's not like a lot of calls where you just get to give them, like, this is the answer to your question, and you can give basically all the detail because it's an easy question. This is one where you have to be very careful about exactly what you say and how you word it.
So you can do that.
Yeah, you can do that. That is legal for you to do. I do, however, think that we missed one very important question to one of the players.
What actions have they actually done so far? Do they
Not that one.
Home involved and champions in the yard.
Did Arcades know that he was not supposed to draw any cards if he chose to use that ability? If you ask him, he says, okay, I draw 2, discard 2. Does Arcades understand this interaction?
If he said those words, then no.
I think that's 100% a question you should double check with the player. Arcades could easily be trying to pull one over on Nicol Bolas and get the draw 2, discard 2 out of it, thinking that he doesn't know how that interaction works. He killed it with the trigger on the stack in case I drew into a counterspell. So even though Bolas looks like the scummy one here, the one who actually had the potential to try and pull something over on the other with the wording was Arcades. his very first statement of, okay, so I draw 2, discard 2, could easily be trying to bait his opponent and be like, sure, that seems reasonable for how it works. So, relevant stuff. 4.1, starter communication policy. Players should have an advantage to a better understanding of the rules. We are not to destroy that. We touched on, this is derived information, right? It's text on a card. You can't represent it incorrectly, but incomplete is not the same as incorrect. You can't lie, explicitly lie, like you can't say I have 3 cards in hand when you have 4, but you can give them a half-truth. That's completely fine. All right, on to the next one. So, we've got some Llanowar Elves, we've got some forests, and we've got a walking ballista on 4. Who can guess what's going to happen? He's going to shoot the elves. Bola says, on your end step, I'm going to ping off all those elves. Arcades exclaims in delight, perfect! I'm going to cast Court of Calling for 3 in response, get a Shaman of the Pack, and kill you. Bolas calls for a judge, at which point we come into the call. So, into the small groups, discuss how you're going to handle this call.
So this is all about
The chunk things are never. Yeah. So the one player is because of the way he's working at a competitive area is he assumes.
Can I have you go back to where, before you do judge?
He says, "Ping all your elves."
Say, put all 3 of them on the stack. Again, he's not protecting his realms.
What is that called?
To me, just.
All right. So we've established that he is active here. He is
Kill this
opposed
one.
to
He did not.
and so he's saying, whatever he's doing.
Did not allow.
The one thing,
He just has the
Real magic.
You can assume the dice is on 1, that was the hand but to animate.
Okay.
yeah, also, he proposes for
Magic
the
is
opponent
not
chose
so if someone
to act
proposes
against
to
the
disrupt,
disruptor.
so once they're disrupted, you must say,
Yeah, unless specified.
He is sort of,
It's meant to like, you have to just say, supposing it's broken, request for
because if you look at his core, it's
and
all.
these papers on one, it's.
Yeah, so he would have to use all of his.
I have to target that.
So the short part was, I will do this whole priority, do this whole priority, do this.
He's got priority, and when he activates his ability,
It's like pumping a shade.
he can continue to put activations on the stack.
He wanted all
Yeah,
these.
but unless he's specifically mentioned that you are, well, actually, asking to retain priority is kind of weird,
You just had to deal with this.
But generally speaking, the, like, unless you
Usually-
specifically.
In this case, like, I think probably assume that's how it's working.
Doing something like that, is way find a shortcut to, I want to.
If you did the one,
Where we already did this, and then.
where is the change?
Would you like to?
It's a thing. And
I
then
mean,
say, oh,
like, unless he specifically said that.
I'm just thinking how I would play this.
Well, you're not anything.
I know, I know, usually two parties.
Where that answer is.
Interrupt the
Because that's always the second half of all these. Is you think you know what's meaning, but in all these cases, assume Nicol Bolas and Arcades are obstinate, awful players, and they're going to make you show them.
Oh, they're both.
Yeah.
Not idiots, geniuses.
Everyone is a rules monger. They want you to show them.
My opponent is gonna be.
You didn't do it the way you should have.
It's crazy. No, it's, I like it. I like
Oh,
what
yeah.
you're doing with it.
Do one,
Like,
every
there's
month.
play all of it is key for there to be a
It's weird.
It's weird with the setup that we had.
Yeah.
And also, I have to turn off your protein.
Because somebody wanted to,
Sorry.
All right.
Say that and it's.
Also, when you put objects to the stack, what objects specifically you take the priority? They are assumed to be added them to the stack individually and allowing each one to resolve before they stay here. Retain priority, wishes to take an action.
All right, judges. It sounds like we at least have a ballpark to play in.
I see your sports metaphor.
So let's pull back in. First thing, as always, are there any questions we want to ask the players?
DQ, no problems. No.
What do you want to ask the player? What do you want to ask?
Where?
Which one?
You are asking Arcades.
All right, Arcades is going to give you an answer.
When are you casting Court of Calling?
With all 3 of his Ballista activations on the stack.
I was going to say rebuttal. So, Nicobolas has proposed a shortcut. Players are assumed to be passing priority back and forth during the execution of the shortcut. So, if you would like to interrupt the shortcut, they either resolve one at a time automatically, or you must interrupt the shortcut wherever you specifically want to interrupt the shortcut.
Is there... Okay, so that's our answer, right?
Is it if there's no opportunity for him to do it with all 3 on the stack unless the Ballista player specifically mentions maintain priority and activate. They have to specifically mention they're maintaining priority, or it's assuming not.
How do the other groups feel about that? Is that the answer we came upon? Did we come upon a different answer? No? Good? Cool. Where is that answer?
All right, so you found it. Go for it.
The answer is in the MTR section 4.2 tournament shortcuts.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, this is one of the... I would encourage everyone to read through the list of shortcuts. Most of them are incredibly intuitive and you know them. And then there's a couple weird ones like this, where I had literally this call that I heard about at F&M that my floor judge botched because, like, just wasn't aware this existed. Because it's a bit fringe, right? Back in the day, it was a little more common to avoid things like pump my Nantuko shade 3 times, bolt it. You can't. And similarly here, he has proposed a thing, it's assumed they're going to resolve one at a time. And because of that assumption, he could never cast Cord after all 3. There are some additional questions I would ask of both players. For example, how have we been handling Ballista previously? If the past 4 times he did it, he's gone, shoot this, wait for you to put it in the graveyard, shoot this, wait for you to put it in the graveyard, shoot this, wait for you to put it in the graveyard. That does sort of change things because that sets up a different pattern with the players. And now you have to start asking questions like, why would you all of a sudden do all of them at once? Like, were you trying to bait something specific out of your opponent? Similarly, asking of Arcades, so you asked him the question of when are you casting Cord? I think that's a great question. When are you casting this Cord of Calling? He says, with all of those abilities on the stack. I would want to ask one more question before I explain to him how tournament shortcuts work. Does anyone have an idea of what that question might be? Are all those abilities on the stack? A good question.
Do you know how tournament shortcuts work?
That's the other one. You want to ask Arcades, why do you think all of those are on the stack? They're like, well, because he said shoot 3. Cool, we get to move on with our lives. There are definitely answers he can give where he makes it clear that he is aware of this and is hoping that his opponent isn't. So again, like, you got to watch out for this sort of stuff with the players when, especially with like all of the communication section where a lot of it revolves specifically around the words the players said. And in the shortcuts, the assumptions we make with those, you got to make sure that actually matches up. All right. Next up. Arcades controls a bunch of lands. His opponent's lands are tapped. Teferi. He says, plus my Teferi. Draw a card, and it's your turn. Ballista untaps. Upkeep. Draws his card for turn. Says, I'm going to float 2 red mana. Judge. Hello there, players. What can I help you with?
Nice.
It seems my opponent has forgot his Teferi trigger to untap lands, and I would very much like to put that onto the stack right now.
Wait.
Wow. You can now go into the groups and have a chat about how we think things are going to go from here. Is I think important.
What do you guys think about that?
You're a madman, Jeff.
This is very much
I appreciate every second of it. Let's go back and do it. Sure.
call. I think what they're doing by saying, like, put it on the stack now, like, they just are. The call sheet, because the call sheet for Nickelball's by pointing down to the very trigger.
Oh,
I was thinking this is
version of the
offer I would like to put it on the stack.
What is the fair
That's not
number?
what I want to decide. Your job is to call attention.
I want to remember if they
It's a beneficial trigger.
We don't not make the calls.
Resolving spells. Right, but as a class, it's
Automatic and we say
right. You'll have listen, like, we'll get to that. You know, as the player, he's very triggered much aware of this thing and wanting to put it on the stack right now. That is very problematic for me. Trying to propose a thing that he has no business performing. It doesn't matter if he's right or not. He's not the judge here.
True. And you say something about that.
Right.
Now we have choice is different than target.
Where is that?
So you can target something to untap something if it's already tapped. But
Back
there is
Draw my card, it goes to your
you
turn.
cannot make
Response, he adds mana to your
no
hand.
lands, they
Yes,
just make
so,
untap.
yes, in his he drew his card, made face, floated 2, and then he realized that he's trying to get the judge to let him untap those 2 lands. Float more damage to bring cards.
Untap instant.
Right, but because it's a delayed trigger, so he activates, he goes, I'm gonna draw a card, and the end step, untap it. He didn't do it. He didn't say he was gonna do it, he just didn't do it. So his opponent is attempting to, usually at a point like this, the trigger is put on the stack because you can't miss. So usually put it on his opponent before he calls the judge. Floated 2 mana, and then it goes, Judge, my opponent forgot to untap 2 lands. I would like to put the trigger on the stack now. At which point, whenever we put the trigger on the stack like that, put it on the stack and immediately resolve it. Nobody gets priority. So the only 2 lands that are untapped are his lands.
There's no judge call. Can you activate? You got priority to it yet?
Yes, it's all untapped.
It says at the beginning of the next instant.
In this situation, I would propose a backup because significant information has not been gained. No credit, like, no significant action has been taken between the point where we would have untapped the land.
Is that being fired?
Right.
So it doesn't matter where.
Like, I guess we have to know how many cards he had in hand.
No,
If we could determine exactly which card in his hand he drew.
If you forget a trigger, you back up, so long as it doesn't.
It's up to the judge.
The judge can't, the judge will decide to back up.
No, we're not.
Not necessarily. But like, this is like, you have to.
You should think about writing on our regular
This is where,
support.
like, Arcades is getting a while for, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So it doesn't matter when.
But it's not, is it still considered a
It's so.
That is the next step.
Hero Dominaria.
We put it on the stack. What happens?
That's what we're looking for.
No, no, because you.
That's true, that.
This thing is not.
All right, judges. Let's roll it back around. So, first question, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Does everyone get what Bolus is trying to do here? Do we get the goal? The goal is to untap those lands and kill his opponent with a Banefire. Yes? Okay, cool. Just making sure we're all on the same page, just in case. So, are there any questions we want to ask the players before we decide on any rulings or anything?
First, I want to know, like, if either opponent can, like that, since that is the only card he drew, it has in hand, can we assume that?
Yes, he's hellbent besides that.
Okay, so
He
we
has
know
some
that
numbers,
that's the
doesn't
card he
matter.
drew this turn. I actually don't think I have any questions then.
Okay.
At least me personally.
No questions? Do we not care if he knew that his opponent missed that trigger? Does that not matter?
Oh, it does matter.
Fine.
It does matter.
All right. So,
This is
what do we think here? We'll start at competitive. Any penalties and fractions? There's not a penalty?
It's a mistrigger.
It's not detrimental.
Is there a penalty?
I got potentially
Sorry.
mistrigger, no infraction.
I meant infraction, not penalty. I had this back.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
Is it an infraction? Sorry.
yes.
Yes. This is a mistrigger with no warning because Teferi is not generally detrimental. It's not on the list. I actually went and looked that up earlier.
I pulled it up for
To
the
make
street.
sure. Yeah. So, per mistrigger policy, at competitive REL, it was missed prior to the current phase in the previous turn, so it's not too late. We should give the opponent the option whether to put it on the stack or not, right? Okay, so Bullis says, yes, I would very much like to put that trigger on the stack. Thank you. We put the trigger on the stack. What happens next?
During the putting it on the stack, you just gotta make choices.
Does he make the choices when it goes on the stack?
Oh, is that-
On resolution.
Does it target?
No.
Okay.
Then when do you put it on the stack?
This ability does not target. Okay, so this ability is on the stack. With this ability on the stack, Arcades taps an island and a plains. That ability resolves. Which lands can he untap? His own lands?
Yep.
Really?
Can't untap things that aren't tapped.
No, he said he tapped it before.
Yeah, before the trigger resolves, he taps both of these, and you're saying he can untap two of those.
It doesn't target?
It doesn't target.
You can untap those two that are.
Untap 2 lands.
I
It
thought
just
it
says
was-
untap 2 lands.
No,
Don't target.
but I thought about specifically.
It's not that.
No players may make choices involving objects that would not have been legal choices for the ability at the time the ability should have triggered. Let's do a rewind.
At which point all of his lands were tapped.
This is the end of the turn when that ability should have triggered. What were the legal choices at that moment? 4 mountains. So, Arcades is free to respond to that trigger. Normal triggers that we put on the stack can be responded to. It's only delayed zone changes that instantaneously resolve. But, even if he taps his own lands, he does not have the option to untap those lands. And subsequently is going to get Banefired in the face for lethal. Sucks to suck. I've done a variant of this question. Yep.
We did have a tangential point.
Sure.
Just the fact that the mistrigger is definitely something that Wallace is definitely taking advantage of. I know it's not cheating and all.
Oh, sure.
Triggers are not cheating.
Yes. Fortunately, although he did not see his opponent break a rule and then not call attention to it because he's not required to do that, and you can miss triggers.
Follow-up question then.
Uh-huh.
So, say he can't Banefire and Requite lethal. Say we're taking the 1.
Sure.
He's got a creature that can later attack him.
Mm-hmm.
If the player says, alright, I'm going to tap your 2, you're standing right there, they're going to untap these 2, and you say, well, no, you can't. Are they locked into those tap
Yep.
plans? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yes.
You had an interesting point made that you say something to Nicol Boss about telling you what call you're making before telling you what the issue on the table is. Like telling your judge, like Nicol Boss told the judge basically what infraction was happening, and you should say something about that.
Sure. I'm a little sure because he didn't. That statement is strictly true, given that Nicol Bolas clearly understands the policy.
Gotcha.
I don't think that's begging for a penalty. So much as it is saying, I understand the mistrigger policy, I know I can choose to put that on the stack.
Maybe not a penalty, but like kind of a gentle warning, like you're here to play kind of thing. Like
He's playing.
well, but
He's
like,
playing very well, actually.
The correct thing for the correct thing for the judge, because my group talked about this like when we were driving in. Nicol Bolas should have said, my opponent forgot his trigger to untap lands with Teferi. That's it. Let the judge make the call. If the judge agrees, then you go through that. You don't get to like flex on the judge and go, I know how this works, judge.
I'm fine with that because you're not telling the judge what it is. You are simply saving them some time in the explanation where they walk you through yada yada yada. You may choose to put that trigger on the stack. He's making clear like, I'm pretty sure this is the situation. I'm fine with that so long as players are not being a jerk with their tone as they explain it to the judge. Which in character, we didn't really have that conversation with the judge. It was just
Like, that's dripping with smugness.
Well,
Like, he's pretty smug.
you got to remember this isn't actually Nicol Bolas.
Isn't it?
It's pretty nickel balls.
So, some final follow-up things. There's obviously the you can't make choices. The other big thing was, how would we handle this at regular REL? Exact same scenario, we're just chilling at F&M. A very competitive F&M, we'll say.
We'd probably back up.
Yeah.
If it's at F&M, like, we'd probably, because...
Would we back up? Is that an appropriate thing per the jar?
Yeah. At regular? No.
We're not going to back up. The jar for mistriggers gives the judge discretion for if it's been too long to be a problem, they can choose to put it on the stack. Obviously, it's regular. You have a lot of flexibility for what you do. But this is a scenario where I think the cleanest solution in line with what's written is just you're the judge. You have the decision whether to put that trigger on the stack or not. And that probably just depends on the general competitiveness of your audience. If your FNM is full of players who like routinely GP grind, put it on the stack. They might as well learn that that's going to how it works so they don't make that mistake in the future. If this is like Johnny GP against first FNM guy, just be like, yeah, we're not putting it on the stack. I believe it would be too detrimental because you should never have 6 mana on this turn. We're not putting it on the stack. So this is definitely one where between competitive and regular, like, there's a very good chance you do something very different. All right. Next up. These ones are going to be quick, but it's in communication, and I've tried to do questions similar to this in the past, and it was vague and awful. So now we're not going to be vague and awful. Arcades has an Academy Ruins, some islands, and each turn they keep activating this for 0 and putting it on top of their deck. They also have no cards in hand in an Ensnaring Bridge, because someone pointed out to me that Gideon can attack and has another line of text, which is like, who knew? And Nicol Bolas has a Gideon and Emblem. Arcady says, well, it doesn't look like either of us can win this game. Do you want to draw and go to the next one? Bolas says, I'd rather not. Relevant information, we are in game 2, and Bolas has won game 1. There are 3 variants of this scenario. This, both players control a Platinum Angel, and both players are doing the engineered explosive shenanigans. We have a question before we go to the groups.
Regarding the first one,
Yes.
What lands does Arcades have?
Arcades has a Darksteel Citadel and 4 copies of Glimmervoid.
And doesn't just win?
And you can go to the groups and discuss. Including how you would handle the judge call to the table. Glimmervoid adds a mana of any color.
Yeah, like, I don't know why that doesn't...
The guy is clearly
You said they have a Darksteel Citadel?
Yeah.
Oh, that's no fun.
Yeah, they're not going to lose their lands. But, so, again, we've got Ruins Loop versus Gideon, Angel versus Angel, and Ruins Loop versus Ruins Loop. So, there are 3 variants of this, which means we'll have 3 answers, but it should be relatively quick, because as soon as you get one of them, it's pretty easy to figure out the other 2.
So is this like... No, I don't understand. Why? It's not slow play. You're not slow play.
You're assuming that, based on your question of like, it seems to be that you're assuming they're just appear to be a...
Right, I don't see a problem. I don't think, like, as long as he's making decisions, like, okay, pass the turn.
Oh, you mean active player?
Well, an active player, non-active player, like, as long as they're making decisions, they can, you know, go all day, and it's just...
They go all day. They choose to go all
Well, they
day.
can go until time runs out, and then, you know...
I think you gave me this one in class.
Can they always choose to go forever? That's a good question.
What is this?
Stand multiple turns.
So basically,
What is this?
He's proposing a loop of actions.
I mean...
he's basically
So Platinum Angel.
No, you still have this first.
Okay, maybe I'm missing the what is
I will he's popping the E.
I swore you gave me this one.
He
You
might have
might
something, I can't remember.
We've only got about
I don't know if I can guess what it is.
Oh, you can do self-stacking? Is that what it is?
And also make sure that you're
Oh, stacking is
Jeff. That's messed up. That's real messed
Well,
up.
why can't you play it?
Yeah,
That's great though.
Oh, he's not seeing. Okay.
That's why I was.
So
That's
you
why
can't.
It's also possible that maybe he only.
I had a lot of that in the past prior to
Okay.
where I was just like, it's awful. Because last year I tried to do the double.
Don't die, get the extra mom and cat.
And someone judged me like, you should probably not discuss this because it's super vague and
So
awful
if we
and not really good.
we keep
answer.
performing,
I have a good answer, so
No
it's in.
it's
Well, now you do. I'm the one that stopped you.
I know you were.
That's why I'm like,
And now you get to see the glory of a correct answer. Ah, I'm so happy. I didn't start a timer for this one, so. Also, this is going.
second one still applies.
Second one.
Second example.
I mean,
Yes,
he
no,
had
I-
it was fun.
You guys have to do so. Getting guys like that, can't actually do anything about that. You can't stop not losing.
so,
Now,
Just because it's kind of
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, if they loop when you
Got it.
definitely someone you have to make that choice.
The word for this is
so the first question. So he doesn't see that. He doesn't see that.
so because
I'd rather
You can
not.
tell
the person
start that question.
who has engineered explosives is able to not activate it, right? He has to not activate it.
What do you ask? I'm gonna ask that one.
Metal Worker player had lightning. Merfolk player has
Yes.
Now,
Metal Worker has no rule. They have no way to kill
Let's say he says I'm playing.
he wasn't playing staff. So like, neither of them do that. Because Merfolk player has a disruptor.
I'm telling him to make these different decisions.
So they're literal hard blocks. If someone moves up to game one, I guess they might or stay here forever. And it was like, there's not a good answer.
You have to go home, but you can't stay.
So
Is this an upgrade? Like,
this is all of this is brand new for M19. That's the only reason it's in here. The answer's actually really easy.
Because like there's like a lot.
wow, that's really cool. Okay, I didn't even see this in.
This is more tying into the communication angle of my presentation.
Yeah, I know you like. I don't know. This move can be broken.
All right, judges. Let's get loopy.
You didn't even give us 3 times the amount of time to discuss it. There's 3 scenarios.
There's 3 scenarios. There's like one with some variance. Anyway, within any of these 3 scenarios, are there any questions we need to ask the players?
I would find out,
Never mind.
That's fine. Yeah, jump.
We want to ask why Arcades thinks it looks like it's going to draw. And then if he says it's because he's going to just do this.
Arcades says, I can't deck out because I have explosives plus Academy.
You know,
But I can't kill my opponent. My only win condition is milling him, and he can't lose with a Gideon. So we're going to draw.
so he's proposing the Engineer Exclusives Academy ruins loop.
He's
And-
done it 3 times in a row now. And he's saying, like, I'm just going to do this forever so I don't deck out.
Well, that seems like a poor choice because you're just going to lose the match.
What? Okay. Can you demonstrate what the loop was?
Yeah, he'll sack an Engineer Explosives, put it on top, next turn he draws it, plays it, sacks it.
So he's playing it for 0.
Yes.
Okay. See, seeing him play it for 0 is important.
Okay. Yes. Judges? Someone's talking. Yeah, what's it?
Does the Nickel Bulls player still have cards in his library that he can roll?
The Nicol Bolas player does still have some cards in his library right now. About half.
this is just me trying to make clarification. How many glimmer voids did you say he had?
4.
4? Okay, that's important too.
Yeah.
And the dark
And since the Nickel Bowls player still has cards that he can draw, is it really a loop then?
That is an excellent question.
Is drawing a card is a meaningful change in the game?
So, that is a very important aspect. Drawing a new card is a meaningful change in the game. So, this is not going on and staying the same until he is decked out. That's first important thing to identify. Because we have identified this, now in all 3 scenarios, no one has a deck. Explosives players only have the explosives. Gideon player is out of cards, and in the Angel scenario, they're out of cards in their deck. Now what do we do in this scenario? How do we handle this? The players clearly have a disagreement. Arcades thinks this game is a draw and wants to go to the next game so he can try and win 2 more. Since he's down a game, and Bolos is consent to sit there forever.
Arcades' choice to keep doing that loop is a fragmentable loop, so he has to make a different choice in order to break that loop.
Absolutely. So, only one player has an active role in this loop in maintaining it. Gideon player's just sitting there. So because of that, Arcades has to make a different decision. Now, imagine you are the judge called to this table. Arcades says, I would like to do this forever. What do you say to, what are the words you say to that player? Can you repeat that again just for everyone so we can, in context?
The proposal you're making is a fragmentable loop, and a different choice needs to be made. So
Excellent.
The game does not continue forever.
So, question with that being the case, so does a different choice count? So, if my calculation, so 1 Darksteel, 4 Glimmer Void, can he, in a random order, alternate casting Engineered for 1 and Engineered for 0? And
Absolutely not.
Okay.
You can't make minor variations in an attempt to make a loop not seem like a loop. If the overall game state is not changing, it's the same spot.
Is that in the same?
That is in the section, yes. So, I love the answer that was given. I think it's perfect wording. We had some in the other section that said something more to the effect of you need to set EE to a different value. So, as we identified, and why I included the little tidbit about Glimmer Voids, was someone in the last session asked, well, what if he could blow up the Gideon? And the answer is, it doesn't matter if he can or not if they don't realize that. And again, you can't give them that info. So you have to be careful how you phrase it. You can't insinuate that there might be another option. You can't say like, well, you can't keep doing that. You have to take another route or something. There are ways you can awkwardly word that get them thinking like, oh, is there something else I could do? It needs to be very clear that like, you can't do that anymore.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Yes. So, now that we've figured out the first one, bummer for Arcades, let's go to the second one. Now we have double plat angels, and again, decks are gone. We have identified that until decks are gone, things are changing, so.
We're assuming there's still E-bridge, right?
No, either player can attack.
Just won't do anything.
In fact, we will assume some real nonsense has happened, and these are the only permanents on the battlefield.
Well, assuming that total's a negative.
Nope, they're both at 20.
Start swinging.
You.
No, I was just
Oh.
sorry.
So what is your answer for this?
I said there are different routes you can take. You can't keep looping E.
So, same as the EE, you tell them they have to do something different. Which one of them has to do something different?
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking about the bridge. About the bridges and all that.
Yeah, there are no bridges here, it's just 2 angels. With just 2 angels, what are we saying to the players? Anyone?
Go ahead. Judge. You pass the turn and then
What you got?
So, I don't know, it seems to me like you can say you have to make a different choice other than not attacking and passing a turn.
Okay, so
Not technically.
this is our second specifically called out neat loop thing. In this one, neither player has an active role in maintaining the loop. The permanents are just sitting there. They're not activating anything to do it. They're not taking any game actions to continue this loop. Because they're not actively participating in that, both players will declare an intention to do the loop a number of times or to continue indefinitely. If they both choose to continue to do it indefinitely, the game is a draw. It's a forced draw. Neither of them has the option to sit there anymore. If Bolus over here says, I'm going to do this 30 more turns, we shortcut that, 30 turns happen, and then they have to do something different. In this case, we still can't force him to attack. We can just say, it is a draw now, and maybe we have a conversation with him about stalling at that point. But the important thing here is to differentiate between passive involvement in a loop and active involvement. Things are just sitting there. If you're not taking any game actions, you are passively participating. So we can't say to one of them, you must attack with your angel.
Well, conversely, what if they are attacking with their angels? Like, I'm attacking you, no blocks. Okay, go to my turn. I'm attacking you, no blocks. Like, can you force someone to block them because you are taking an active role?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
What you can do is say that you want to continue attacking for some reason. Again, are you going to do this indefinitely? Yes, the game state's not changing, done. Or, let's say you have an answer to the angel, but you want to attack until they're in the negatives. You say, I'm going to do this 30 more times. Other player says, sure, well, you can do this 30 more times. You put him to -1,000,000, kill his angel, and win the game. But that has to get shortcutted. You're not allowed to manually work through that.
Okay.
So, that leads us into our final scenario. We have a pair of engineering explosives, and now the number doesn't matter, so they just have a bunch of islands. No deck left, just an EE against the world for both players. What do we do?
It's active player has to break the loop. I can't remember.
Is it active player?
Who is active player when we're passing turns?
Arcades
Arcades is always active.
He's also calling the judge on his turn. So, fun fact about the way loops used to be,
Used to, okay.
that used to be right. It used to be active player, which means if I'm aware of that in Nicol Bolas, and I'm Nicol Bolas, I wait until it's Arcades' turn to call a judge, because now he has to do something different.
Like I said,
That is no longer the
new way
case.
to drop it.
Now, if both players are active in the loop, they have to declare a number, and we go through the lowest number of that, or again, they declare to do it indefinitely and it stops. So they can say, like, we're going to do the EE thing forever. Cool, the game is a draw, move on. Or he says, I want to do it 30 times, I want to do it 12 times. We do it 12 times, we end where he said they have to do something different now and discontinue the loop. So it's gone from forcing someone to lose to now it's just another draw scenario.
That nearly is fine.
So-
I'm really having to like kick someone with that.
For my reference, you can see 4.4, which is titled Loops, and is literally all of this information. The reason this is included is, like I said, I've tried to do this in the past. The rules used to be really vague, and now they're nice and clean and clear, which is awesome. And they give us nice ways to resolve these sorts of scenarios where I've seen a variant of this come up where one player is at infinite life and has something else, and the other player has explosives or whatever. But it's rare that it comes up, but it is important that we have a clean way to decide these things, especially because most of the time, one player has a strong incentive for the game to not end. Yeah.
When did this get up?
M19.
Okay.
Brand new.
You can read Toby's article. It's
I do vaguely remember something changing that happens. I think that was a nice.
All right. Keep things moving. So, Arcades has a Chalice in the Void on 1. Nicol Bolas says, I'm going to tap a swamp on an island. I'm going to cast this here, Serum Visions.
Okay.
Sure. That resolves.
Okay.
Bolas says, okay, draw. I will bottom both the cards. I have a black mana in my pool, and I will pass turn. At which point Arcades realizes, oh wait, that's a 1-drop spell? And calls a judge.
Oh god.
Great.
So,
Like Nicol Bolas, these scenarios.
feel free to discuss this in your groups.
so.
I didn't think about that.
We want to change.
Ley line of anticipation.
There you go.
Wow.
Whose turn?
Or just change that to
That's a lot of information that.
Or it's an opt.
Sure. Yeah. Nicol Bolas got a lot of information on that.
Ley line of anticipation.
the goal is for Ballista to be the bad guy in most of these.
Also, that entire loop thing was like, I know what it is. I know you know. Stop doing that.
Technically, no.
Oh. Additionally, judges, for this particular question, I really want you to find the rationale in the documents for your answer. The last couple we put it on the screen and it seemed like you guys have definitely found it from the answers you've given. I want to see where the answer is. Yes.
Let's see what he said. Okay, you guys do what you want, I'll fuck around.
There is.
My phone is
The sure resolves is probably more relevant than him calling it.
What was the original title of this presentation? Something about scum?
Something about that.
So, what kind of information
Also, like,
is
so what you would say is blue black, and then you would say yes,
free?
blah, 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 blah.
I remember what the
Floating
question
black.
was in the last one.
What was it? So,
It involved somebody having, it had to do with the lab manager.
Oh, yeah,
Well, so,
Thing.
and the other player having the platinum agency. That's what it was. Similar idea, different thing.
See, but like, just because you let it do
That's why I looked real
the
familiar.
game is, what we want to fix is we want to maintain as close to the game state as we can.
Ideally, yeah.
So, but like, even if he tried, like, there is like so much information been like derived because this Cerevision resulted in should not.
Yeah. And you got a card.
Yeah,
What if Bulls has like 6 other cards in hand?
so we can't determine exactly.
He's not helping. It's not the only one.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's a better series of that also. One point.
This is true, it's up to him, I remember. Then I
It's a
slapped it,
better
then
shirt.
I put down my badge and chugged it.
But then you kind of like look at our case, like, really? You didn't know Cerevisions was a one drop?
Hey, he doesn't have to know every.
You know enough to play Chalice of the Void in Modern, and you don't know Cerevisions.
Sometimes people aren't paying attention. I've got the
Then you politely go to the side and go,
where you've done that.
hey,
Challenge
you
check.
just have to kindly remind me.
You gotta make him have it.
Don't go so fast.
No, because that's how you don't get to be good.
Read your game card.
How much time I got left? 4:30? Oh man, we're gonna have plenty of time.
Oh, no, yeah, that's.
Cares if we're gonna finish early enough. Oh, I had a good one at market the other night.
So that's, I think that might be.
You have a secret short.
So like if they did go score, that like they should.
We continue for a second.
I mean,
I am definitely not doing it.
Wait.
Because,
Hey Jeff,
can't.
could you go back to what he said before?
yeah, like.
He said he has no obligation to remind me that.
And well, the player saying that they didn't remind me to search is the one that has the arbiter. They should know.
Yeah.
That's one where they're trying to scum or
This is you were trying to scum a communication.
Do you have a response? I have
There's a seriousness.
Yeah.
What?
What you tell them that, and they say, "Well, I didn't know I could search from that card. I'm playing arbiter for some other reason. What if I had 2 Simian Spirit Guides in my hand? I didn't know it let me search." They're not required to remind you until it's resolving.
Until no,
And at the
you
point
need
where
to do it if it's you have to if it's resolving. Then
It's too late.
Then it's too late.
We need some timing, like descriptions from you, because if he says, I tap a swamp in the valley, cast Cerevision, and Arcades just goes, yeah, sure, it resolves, like, quick. Like, and
Those are questions you would want to ask the players, yes?
yeah, because like, but like if Nico Bulls goes, I tap this, cast air vision, and then just sits there.
All right, all right, judges. Let's turn it back around. I suspect that there are some questions that we would like to ask our players. So what do we got?
Basically, we have to ask Arcades, like, how quickly did you listen to what he was doing? Did you like give him a chance to like finish?
Are you asking Arcades at the table or in private?
I can think we can ask at the table, like, how quickly did you ask him or allow the spell to just resolve?
He tapped his mana. Arcades thought about it for a minute. He saw it and was just like, sure, that spell's fine. Arcades is sitting with several counter spells in hand and a lot of mana open.
Okay.
So he had to think about it and was like,
Relevant.
sure. Are there any other questions we'd like to ask? Perhaps about awareness of a certain artifact?
Well, my other question would be more for Nicole Bolas and be along the lines of, how well do you know the comprehension rules?
What do you mean?
The question is how would I needed to take a second to think about how exactly I'm going to phrase that question.
Sure.
Because I want to know if he knows about 106.4 about having to announce floating mana after upon.
He does not. He is not aware of that.
Okay.
Is Nico Bolas?
No.
I'm asking Nicole Bolas is aware of that.
So I would pull Nicol Bolas away from the table at this point and go, why did you float the extra black? Like, why when you cast Air Visions did you float blue-black?
I wanted him to think it was a 2-drop so he would forget his chalice trigger. So,
He did not. No, he didn't break a rule. He is allowed to cast that spell.
He did break a rule.
But he didn't know it.
so do we have, real quick, judges, do we have any more questions for our players? If not, let's proceed to, did anybody do anything wrong here?
GRV for Nicole Bolas.
A GRV for Nicol Bolas? Why? What did he do?
He did announce his floating mana for 106.4.
Would that be communication?
It's not. It's 106.4. That's why he said it's in 4. I was like, is it? Yeah. So, Nicol Bolas has committed a game rule violation. Players are required to announce floating mana after they finish paying costs. He announced it after his spell had finished resolving, which is not okay. Everything else Nicol Bolas did is perfectly fine. If he had said, tap these, cast Serum Visions floating a black, and Arcades then missed it because he still saw 2 lands tapped, tough. You can miss your own trigger, you can chump check your opponent's chalice to the ends of the earth. That specific bit is the bit he did wrong. Yeah.
I was gonna say, so say Arcades in this case controlled a Valley Guardian of Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, he didn't do anything wrong because he used the black to pay for the.
Correct. If he has a Thalia and a chalice, now it's just free to bluff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's easy mode though.
Yeah.
So, this is a GRV. What kind of fix do we want to do for that?
Warning. Or back up.
We want to do a warning? Do we want to rewind this?
Back up.
No,
How
I
far,
would.
it depends how far. Like.
I wouldn't, because that's a lot of information gained from just one Serum Visions.
There's also a lot
For
of...
the benefit of the guy who made the penalty.
Yeah.
I don't have an issue with rewinding for the benefits that someone gained legally.
Yeah. The other important thing is that this is not mistrigger.
Right.
He didn't miss his chalice trigger. Well,
He did.
he did, but the opponent did something illegal.
And he did it before the mess. Something
Yeah.
preempted.
I'd rewind on that.
Yes, we're going to rewind to the moment where that's on the stack. He'll announce his floating mana, at which point it's very likely his opponent will remember his chalice trigger all of a sudden. Alright, next up. There are a lot of lands in play now. I got some nice animations going on. Alright,
10 and 7.
on Arcades' end step, Nicol Bolas is going to cast Gifts Ungiven. What that card doesn't matter, what that card says doesn't matter, it's an instant. Before anyone worries about that. Yeah, I'm going to counterflux that. Sure, says Nicol Bolas. I'll cast Remand. Arcades pauses for a second, gives Nicol Bolas kind of a weird look, and is like, yeah, that resolves. Return my gifts to my hand with Remand, and I will draw a card. Hold on. I didn't know you were targeting gifts, or I wouldn't have let that spell resolve. That's not my fault. You should have asked what I was targeting. Judge.
This one's easy.
It is, but it comes up a lot in modern.
It does.
I've actually.
But you could have warmed them up with this one.
Yeah, probably. I put this one at the end at this point because we didn't get to these half. We would now go. Because I think it's because we had the extra long thing. We only had
So I put the ones at the end are all the ones that like it's not as important if we get to.
Is that fine?
If there's one that on spell, yes, because you can remand counterblast. It is a perfectly legal move. You have to.
Okay, let's do this.
I had no idea.
Because what if I just want to drop?
Brainstorm, counterspell, forcible, what's targeting?
Usually yours, yeah. You're like over here. We don't actually know. That's why we're all doing this.
And as always, confirm your work.
It's right here at the MTR.
Yes,
Which is
You gotta show your work. You only have points.
Alright, sorry, I scrolled up a bit, so it's not going to get the exact, I know it's, you're assumed to target
Oh, yeah,
the top.
yeah.
If a player casts a spell or activates an ability that targets an object on the stack, it is assumed to target the legal target close enough to the top of the stack unless the player specifies.
Brainstorm, forces counter, force, by default.
What they
When
said.
it throws spells quickly, counterspells, it's assumed.
There's a little bit of extra motivation. I do.
Of.
The more I would have let it resolve.
Yeah, I saved them a couple questions after.
He was not.
Well,
Which represents a turn.
well, that's what
And
I'm
I'm
saying.
more than
Because we may have different measures.
That's how magic plays.
No, you were saying that he had target, so like if he had one target,
with these out quite often.
so he doesn't
Oh,
just get to target cards.
He
He
goes.
has to not target when it goes on a stack.
Right.
With the exception of
Well,
this.
educate.
Normally, if then you can target like right out.
My phone is
If he says, yeah, I'll tell you where to go.
Is there a following scenario that can
This level question.
Is it-
Is there something different you can do instead of that?
Is it that it's Arcades
Honestly, I think
because you said it's
being countered by
assumed
path
that,
evasion.
like, tournament shortcuts, it is assumed the top.
Especially if you ask a question of
buys
goals
in next time.
then we would try and pull one over.
So,
Versus just
if
like
Arcades
just
wants
bother
to know,
announcing
does he
it.
have to ask?
Right.
Or
Now what's gonna happen?
No, you can just assume it's
Think about it.
Okay, so, man, you're.
Well, he's like, I've got no, it doesn't.
So,
And then you said, would you help?
I know what the.
And it's
I remember my question for you? When my opponent.
So Arcades isn't breaking any rules.
Correct.
Okay.
You're never responsible for ensure that he's not using the shortcut.
Okay. So players turning have to go basically abide by these shortcuts unless they explicitly say we agree to do it this way.
Well, we're posing it differently somehow.
But I mean, like, is it the same thing? Like, if Nicholas is constantly like saying, "I cast this targeting this," like for the rest of for the entire game, he's been, "I cast this target this, cast this."
It becomes just to see.
Yeah, they're like one rule. If all games
I had to
It's
remind
been
myself
remained
that.
the whole game. And now.
Alright, where are we at?
I was.
Ooh, that's actually gonna time out pretty nicely, I think. Alright, judges! Do we have any questions for our players before we dive into rulings?
Well, we just kind of discussed, like, when you were talking about the walking ballista thing, we have to know what like the previous kind of thing was doing. So if like, you know, we don't know, was gifts ungiven like constantly being like countered and like he having to save it with remand and just, you know, doing that? Because at this point,
Were previous remands, did you always announce a target when you cast remand previously?
No. Every time I've cast it before that, I think I've cast it one other time this game and it was on a cryptic command. He played cryptic and I was like, remand.
Sweet, bad news.
bad news balls there.
Okay. Did you point the remand at your gifts ungiven when you cast it? So
no.
if you
His
go-
cards are on a pile on his side, my cards are on a pile on my side. So the remand is on top of the gifts, but his counterflux is not in the middle of that.
I just
It's,
want to make sure it's like
my counterflux is in the middle of my board, and the other two cards are in the middle of his board.
Yeah, I gotta make sure it's not like going. It's like gifts,
Right,
remand,
yeah,
pointing
so
it
it's
at my
like-
gifts ungiven, but nobody goes staring.
Nope, they both just have a pile of cards. They have not built a stack.
Okay, that's important to do. That makes sense.
Now I'm gonna do that.
That is somewhat, well, potentially. All right, so are there any other questions for our players? No? Awesome. So, what's our ruling?
So this is a communication policy. There are multiple objects on stack at the time that remand is placed onto the stack, and since Nicobolus did not specifically specify what legal spell he was targeting with remand, it is assumed by NTR 4.2 that he is targeting the topmost legal target on the stack, which is counterclockwise.
Okay. Any different opinions, or is everyone on board with giving Nicobolus a CPV for that? Yes? Head shakes. Cool. So, bang. Nope. Yeah, so this is the relevant line. Player casts a spell is assumed to be targeting the topmost one. CPV was changed a little while ago so that it included all of Section 4. It used to only include Section 4.1 specifically. So several months ago, you could not give a CPV for this. And I think in this particular case, it is reasonable to give the CPV. There's a line in there specifically that says you have to believe that the opponent acted on the incorrect information. I gave you a little bit of a handicap in there in Arcades flat out saying, like, if I'd known it was targeting gifts, I wouldn't have let it resolve. If they hadn't said that, you obviously have to ask that question first. If you don't believe anyone acted on incorrect information, you shouldn't give the penalty. If this is just a straightforward case of, like, we were a bit unclear with our language, the reason those shortcuts exist is those are the default. You have to explicitly announce if you're deviating from those, and if you don't, that's what you did. So you can give the CPV, that's fine. You can also just tell Bolus, your remand is targeting the counterflux. That's what the shortcut says you're doing, that's what you're doing. You didn't actually target your gifts because you didn't explicitly say you're deviating from this shortcut. Similar to the targeting a bunch of things shortcut.
So with that being said, before giving the ruling, in this case, would we ask Arcades if his decision would have been different had he known what remand was targeting?
I would confirm that with him. Obviously, like, we're walking up at the judge part, which is after that, so you would want to ask that of them. You have the information by virtue of this format. But yes, that's absolutely something you want to ask with these communication things, now that CPV includes all of Section 4, is you have to ask if it actually mattered. There's some stuff where you can be unclear. For the walking ballista one, we didn't give a CPV for that one, did we? But there was a miscommunication involving the communication policy. But the answer was just like, the communication policy is clear how this goes. This is how it went. Like, the thing you thought you could do, you just didn't do. Because we have that clean fix where, like, there's no advantage, nothing went weird or wrong, it went the way it says it should go, we don't have to give the CPV every time. And shouldn't be because it upgrades on 2 and that's overly harsh if it didn't actually matter. So you have to take that into consideration with everything.
So in this situation also, if we are asking them that kind of a question away, is it an actual factor into whether or not they could have a response? Like, if they have a handful of lands, and they're like, oh, I wouldn't let that resolve, but that's clearly a bluff, like...
You don't want to go on their hand, but it is reasonable to go on, like in standard, if they say that and are tapped out, obviously they couldn't respond and it didn't matter. Now, there's also the aspect of CPV of its attract warning. And like in the Walking Ballista scenario, we didn't do anything, right? We had no penalty. What if Elves player was trying to be super scummy, like knew how it worked and tried to sneak it into play? We don't have a way to track that. So you have to balance out tracking bad stuff when there's a potential for advantage versus these things have default actions that are designed to not give anyone an unfair advantage. And so if the default action covers it well enough and you're not worried about that, then you don't have to bother with the penalty. Which is why CPV got a little more complicated when it moved to all of Section 4.
So you were saying that you could give CPV here?
Yes.
Does that change your fix? Or just give CPV and say Remand's targeting the counter?
Yeah, you can just give CPV and Remand is targeting the counterflux. Oof. Which is rough. The alternative is... The alternative is you can give CPV and then do the rewind, which is just like Remand is targeting gifts. If anyone's drawn a card, it's not quite a rewind if no one's done anything yet.
Right.
If he's drawn the card from Remand, then like we do a rewind for that because CPV allows rewind. In which case you're like, okay, it's targeting gifts. You have this penalty. Opponent, you may not respond.
I guess it's a follow-up question since you said that they were putting their cards in files on their side.
Yeah.
Could Nicobolas have argued that since I placed my Remand on top of my gifts ungiven, I was indicating I was targeting the gifts ungiven?
They absolutely can argue that.
Especially if there's precedent for it.
Right, and that's why it's important to ask that question of how have we handled previous remands. If the last one that happened when I was remanding his spell, I put it over on his spell, that gives you some evidence to go the other way, right? But if they just say every time it's just been, I play my spells on my side, he plays his on his side, that doesn't really give you anything to go on, right? Because who knows what's targeting what. And that's a little less common. You know, most players will build their little stack of this here, then this here, then this here in blue mirrors, but...
I do physically build the stack.
Yeah. All right, this is my last one. These are play mats. I know it's possible no one knew that, but if you've never seen one before, these are play mats. All right, well, Nicobolas, it appears, has fallen to Arcades in Game 1 and opts to be on the play for Game 2. Sure, why not? Nicobolas has a little think to himself. What's that Burning Wish doing over there? Arcades and Nicobolas finish shuffling. They present their decks for cuts. And Nicobolas calls for a judge. Judge! My opponent has presented to me an illegal deck.
Is that specifically what's said?
Yeah, so Bolas is going to call for a judge. I think we can assume from this why he isn't calling a judge. He has not said anything yet. We will do that part, you know, with the asking the players the questions. We'll start that right fresh with the judge call. So, have at it, players. Judges, whatever.
So, this is falls under, like, I have to tell you that you're doing this and give you all chance to resolve it.
I'm gonna let you know right now.
Let him sink his own shit.
Well, every other one's been into our 4.2, so why not this one? So I'm sure it's not here.
It's a deck slash and there's definitely a just deck. If you go to
Yes, this is the correct case.
always has it's also I was in there the other night as I finished this up.
Probably assume that Arcades is not the one who did it. I mean, obviously is, but
Here's my deck.
I don't think Nicobolas did it.
no,
Nicobolas, nothing.
besides, he just.
Nicol Bolas did nothing wrong.
Technically, this time he did.
That should be the name of your actual secret name of your.
If I use these again in the future, they'll 100%. Nicol Bolas did nothing wrong.
But he did do something wrong with
Oh, he did something wrong in a couple of
He
them.
goes, hey.
That's actually why Nicol Bolas has this year.
Notice you get a less than 60 card deck. I can get a free win here.
It's so good.
I just let him
I
take
love
cuts,
the
and then
Arcadius
also
Nicol
take
Bolas.
cuts.
When Mark did it, he did Atari and Nintendo and put like pictures of consoles. And I was like, that's cute, but I want to do something magic.
Yeah, that's good.
Mark Mason.
Yeah, he was the one that gave the class. That's where I remembered this. He did the MTR class. It's like,
And then, so I was like, my head was like, oh, Atari is I do Dragon Lords. I'm like, Stonguard, Ghost. There's not an end. I was like, what about the new ones?
The old ones?
Yeah, the new ones that are the old. I almost used the really old art of Arcades.
Why not?
Better.
Nicol Bolas is
Nicol Bolas
right on his rules.
Yeah, he's just like sitting there with a
Look
book.
at that. They said
they figured out why Nicol Bolas.
spent so much time in the gym doing Hey guys, what have we decided about this?
All right, judges, we've got about 4 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get through the discussion on this. So,
Probably really scummy.
You have a follow-up?
first things first, I believe that someone's going to have some questions for somebody, or some questions about the general board state that we might want to ask. Anybody?
What's this,
First thing we do have to ask Bolas if he saw, before presenting for cuts, if Burning Wish was not in the library.
Yeah, I saw it while he was
I
sideboarding.
wouldn't say that. I would just ask, why does Bolas think that the deck is not legal at this point? Because the Burning Wish is probably still sitting there at this point.
Yes, the Burning Wish is still there, and he's going to tell you, Bolas will tell you in character, if you ask him why he thinks the opponent has an illegal deck, he's going to say, I saw a Burning Wish over there when he was sideboarding, and he didn't pick it up, so I'm assuming his deck is 59 cards. Do we have any other questions for anybody?
Arcades.
Uh-huh.
How many cards in your deck?
How many cards are in your sideboard?
Sure, we can check. Either one of those works. But it is actually very important that we check that that is 59 cards before we rush off to like, yes, deck problem, got him. And then it turns out the card he wished for is in his deck and he didn't take it out and it just is 60 cards.
I was gonna say, theoretically, you're not. You're just
Either one of them may have done anything wrong.
So,
That's actually fun.
Arcades has in fact presented a 59 card deck in Legacy because that's where you play Burning Wish. So, what are we gonna do? Are there penalties to give out? Are there infractions that then warrant penalties, we'll say?
So
Josh?
the level one answer is that it's a deck problem on Arcadie's side, which is upgraded to a game loss because it was discovered during the presentation period.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have a question because the first line under philosophy is players are expected to call attention to deck errors immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says not gain potential advantage from having the cards in their deck. So does that only apply to their own deck?
That's a good question. Yeah. So, do we think that Arcadius should be getting a game loss for deck problem?
Yes.
Who thinks Arcadius gets a game loss for deck problem? Cool. Who is filling that out on Arcadius' slip and then walking away from the table?
Not yet.
Huh. So we have something else to do. What else do we need to do? Is there other questions to ask? Are there other penalties, infractions, whatever?
What game is this?
Game 2.
I was gonna say, it's game 3, I'm taking the match. When did you?
Yeah, it's not game 3. We're not taking the match slip yet.
Your opponent cast spells through it. Well, yeah, your opponent broke the rule, but like you didn't remind them that your blood was.
Are we satisfied with just a deck problem?
Are we asking?
I'm asking I'm gonna ask Nicol Bolas, did you know this was deck problem?
Well, I didn't know because maybe he just didn't take the cyborg card out, but I suspected. And I saw it when he was sideboarding, but I waited until he presented because I know my rules. And I know that if it happens during presentation, it's a game loss. But if I wait till we start playing, it's only a warning. And he will explicitly tell you all that because he is a very, very, very bad liar. Or very confident.
Well, we're getting the game loss,
Mm-hmm.
but now we gotta fix the deck.
Okay.
And then we gotta set up game 3.
Okay. So we're going to fix the deck, return to a 60-card deck, although it's a game loss, so we're redoing stuff and yada yada. Is there anything else we're doing?
My understanding is that failure to maintain game state partially exists as a way to keep players from sandbagging penalties up until they would become worse in the future. However, I'm not certain at which point this would apply in between games.
Yeah, because it's gameplay.
Oh, it is cheating. Okay.
Spoiler alert! A person breaks the rule defined by the tournament documents, lies to a tournament official, or notices an offense committed in their match and does not call attention to it.
Yeah.
Nicol Bolas noticed an error in his match and did not call attention to it until it was more beneficial for him and has cheated and is no longer a part of our event.
That's what it's trying to get.
So the question
Well, I was thinking.
for your statement though, you said he didn't know if his opponent defended the deck, he didn't know if he sided.
But he suspected.
Yeah, it's tempting to
And if you suspect an issue, you still need to call attention to it as soon as you think there is an issue. If he thinks there, if you think there's enough of an issue to think that waiting to call attention to it will be advantageous for you, then you think there's an issue strongly enough that you need to call a judge at that moment.
If this was game 3, do you apply the game loss first, the cheating DQ first?
I apply the cheating DQ first.
Okay.
So more harsher of the penalties?
Are we looking?
Because you cheated.
I was wondering if you want to kick the guy while they stand.
Hold on, judges. Yes.
So are we only looking at cheating for Nicol because he told us that he noticed that while sideboarding?
Yes. A very important part of the investigation, which is why we didn't say that until, obviously you saw his thought bubble, but that's outside info. But we did, one of the very first questions was, when did you notice? And so it is very important that he offered that I noticed it at this point.
Has Arcades done anything wrong if he's shuffling and a card isn't under his play mat?
No, but he has done something wrong when he has presented for cuts. Because you've now presented an illegal deck.
So, are you calling it, is there an offense occurring when it's shuffling?
I see where you're going. I believe it still is, yes.
So,
You notice an error.
There's a weird line into here. I'll just explain what's it. This is a devil's advocate point. Obviously, you should probably lean on cheating. Here's the devil's advocate point, which is while you're shuffling and there's a card, let's say a card fell loose and you're shuffling, you're not doing anything wrong. The only time you would finally assert that your deck is legal is when you put it in front of your opponent. So at that point, he now knows that you forgot that. But at any point before that, you don't know what's going on with that card. Maybe you're thinking, man, I'm thinking about the proposition, still sideboarding that card out. It isn't until you present it is it actually illegal. So is he doing anything wrong? Yes. Is the devil's advocate.
So Nicol Bolas tells us that. Do we still DQ him?
Yeah. So my line is accidental cards versus noticed cards from gameplay. If you're shuffling and a card falls and I'm Nicol Bolas and I notice it, I can't know he's not going to pick it up till he presents. I should be a good person and call attention to that, but like, if the guy's like, here's my deck, and he says there's a card, I'm not applying a penalty to anyone. It's just pick your card up. This, tucked under the mat on the side, and outside info, it's a card from game 1 that was played and stuck there. That card has been there for a long time. If it's the only card in Exile, it's been there from, partway into that game, all the way through the end. There's a huge chunk of time to notice that you haven't picked that up, and then you've been sideboarding, and that card's not with your anything, and that is not acceptable to not point out.
Why?
Because the rules say you have to.
Say you have to point out what? I'm still not seeing where he broke. Like you're saying, I don't see where he broke a rule until the deck's presented.
I think there is a completely reasonable assumption, or a completely reasonable basis to DQ.
Okay.
On the basis of, I know my opponent is going to commit a problem, even if they have not yet.
Okay.
Like, to me, and I think generically, it is a safe bet to say that if you think they're about to cause a problem, you are still required to call attention to it. if you're like
Sandbagging.
especially if you're sandbagging it for a different penalty.
Also, think about how miserable of a tournament experience it is if everyone's just sitting there waiting for their opponent.
I don't have a problem with DQing here. I'm just trying to be.
No, there's definitely a devil's advocate side, like Min said, of the have you technically broken a rule yet?
Yeah, they haven't committed an offense, but knowing that they're going to commit an offense is.
I believe so, yes.
Well, it is also his admission. Like, it's further evidence. So, like, he's watching that card and he's like,
Again,
you're gonna forget that. And
our player in this scenario has enough certainty that an error is occurring to wait. That to me is a sufficient level of certainty to know that the error is going to happen.
Cross the line.
Yeah, that's where you cross the line. Is you're sure enough the error is going to happen to wait and abuse it.
Let me bring you to another scenario where they haven't broken the rules yet. You're at a pre-release. A player grabs some cards from another pile. Like, while building, he grabs some cards from somewhere else and puts into his pool. Sure. Has he done anything wrong yet?
Not yet. And I'm not going to DQ if you don't call attention to it, but you should call attention to it.
Sideboard, or is it basically?
Let's say he got it from a previous pre-release, and he's just putting cards with the cards that's currently his pre-release pool.
Yes, I would stop.
Has he already built his deck?
Yeah.
No, he's deck building, he's doing this.
Oh, stop.
Would you DQ me? Would you DQ?
Oh, stop. You can step in and stop non-gameplay errors, assuming I'm the judge in this.
Yeah.
I'll stop him though. I would DQ him. Oh, stop.
If you're the opponent there, the
No, it's deck building. It's deck building. They're inserting cards from outside of the into their pool, but they haven't built.
if you're a judge, you should stop them. And if you're a player and you see that, that is outside of your responsibility because you're not actively their opponent.
But
You're only responsible for things happening in your match or your teammates in a team event.
But you, like, as the player in that scenario, that is very much a point where you want to call it to it immediately.
Yeah, that's the thing. You have an incentive to do the right thing there.
Right, and the other example have every incentive to wait.
Yeah, and that's the problem with the deck building one is you have an incentive to not call attention to it, which is why we punish you for not doing it. Because if there's an incentive to do something we don't want you to do, that means there needs to be a greater punishment for doing it to make sure you won't do it. Which is why deck problem currently sucks.
How do I
Free outside opinion.
Good job, Jeff.